Welcome everyone to Start, Sit, Stash, Quit Week 14. My name is Justin Boone, the lead fantasy analyst at theScore, and we have made it to the final week of the fantasy regular season. So let's see if we can get you over the finish line and into the playoffs, beginning with my key starts for Week 14. And at quarterback, it's Sam Darnold hosting the Falcons. He is back on another hot streak, put up good fantasy stats in 3 straight outings, and overall, he's been a solid fantasy starter this season with top 13 weekly finishes in 9 of his 12 games. And his opponent, the Falcons, they're giving up the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this year, so Darnold is a strong QB1 this week. At running back, I don't do this often, but I'm picking somebody on the Bills. James Cook on the road against the Rams. He's been having a great year. He's the RB7 on the season, has 11 touchdowns in 12 games. He's also coming off one of his best performances of the year with 120 scrimmage yards and a score in the snow on Sunday. And the Rams have been getting crushed by running backs lately. The 9th easiest opponent for fantasy RBs. Alvin Kamara had 119 yards against them last week. Saquon Barkley over 300 yards and 2 touchdowns the week before. So get ready for Cook to put up another huge stat line and finish as an RB1. For my start at receiver, got another revenge game this week. We just watched Jerry Jeudy decimate his old club on Monday night. Calvin Ridley might be the next one to do it. Ridley and the Titans, they're welcoming the Jags to Tennessee for this one, and he's getting a very weak version of his former team, Jacksonville. They're permitting the 3rd most fantasy points to receivers, and in the last 2 weeks alone, they got tagged by Nico Collins for 119 yards, Amon-Ra St. Brown for 161 and 2 scores, and Jameson Williams for 124 and a touchdown. So Ridley has an excellent shot to post wide receiver 2 fantasy stats, maybe even better this week. And then for my start at tight end, Cade Otton versus the Raiders, and Otton's been a little less impactful since Mike Evans came back, but I think this is a game where he's going to get back on track. The Raiders are the 3rd friendliest matchup for fantasy tight ends, and it's not like Otton isn't getting the targets. 7 passes thrown his way last week, he just didn't capitalize on it. This time around, I think he will, so he's a low-end tight end 1 this week. We could jump to the sits next, and things are not looking good for Kirk Cousins. The guy hasn't thrown a touchdown in 3 games, has 6 interceptions during that time, including 4 last week, and now he's got to go on the road, and he's got to face his former team in Minnesota. Now, sometimes revenge games can be a good thing. I'm not sure that's the case when a player has been performing this poorly, and the Vikings know Kirk well. They're going to be ready for him. Plus, we've seen the odd quarterback get home against that Brian Flores defense, but there is nothing about the way Cousins is playing to make you think he's going to do it. So send Cousins to the bench this week. And I think if he has another bad game, don't be surprised if the Falcons send Kirk to the bench as well. For my sit at running back, Gus Edwards at the Chiefs, and this one is simple. His snaps went up last week. The production really didn't. He's been held under 35 yards in 3 straight games and in 6 of his last 8 appearances. I'm not expecting that to improve against the Chiefs defense that allows the fewest fantasy points to running backs, so make sure you park the Gus bus this week. I would also think twice about using Deebo Samuel here, and I know he was my sit last week as well. That resulted in his 3rd consecutive game under 25 yards, and you can make excuses for him. Brock Purdy missed some time before. Last week was the snow game in Buffalo, but the bottom line, Deebo just isn't getting it done. The Bears defense that he has to play this week, they are not a get-right spot. So Deebo, just a risky wide receiver 3 flex option. And then at tight end, it's a tough week to find a sit. There's 6 teams on bye, but I would be careful about using Cole Kmet at San Francisco. He's been held to 4 targets or less in 4 of his last 5 contests. The 49ers, they've underachieved this year. They're still tough against tight ends, the 3rd best defense against the position. Now, the only caveat that I'm going to throw out here is the Bears have some injuries at receiver and running back. Some guys missed practice on Wednesday. DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, DeAndre Swift, Roshan Johnson. So keep an eye on that. If a few of those guys are sidelined, maybe Kmet could be played. That covers us for the sits, so we can shift over to the stashes. And this one is specifically for the fantasy playoffs because this guy's on bye this week. But Jaleel McLaughlin on the Broncos, he's the first stash that I'm going to recommend. Coming off his best game of the season, 85 scrimmage yards on 16 touches. And it's the Broncos backfield, so it's risky to delve into because Sean Payton always seems to be playing that hot hand game. But McLaughlin's going to have the best chance to have the hot hand after the bye because he's coming off a very good game and he's got a positive matchup against the Colts. So McLaughlin is somebody that you pick him up, you stash him. Let's see if he can keep this going. And then the last guy that I'm going to recommend, Kendre Miller on the Saints. I've talked about him on the Score Fantasy Football podcast. He's on IR, but he's expected to come off this week. And their interim coach, Darren Rizzi, has been saying nothing but good things about him, which is a lot different than what their former coach was like. He basically took every opportunity he had to say something negative about Miller. This is a situation where I think you go and pick up Miller. You can stash him on IR for the week until they activate him, which probably won't happen until Saturday. And if we see an Alvin Kamara injury over the final few weeks, then all of a sudden Miller could step in and have some fantasy relevance. So he's a guy that you can grab right now, throw on your bench. Let's see what he can do down the stretch if he gets an opportunity. He is a very talented player. That is not in question. The only issue is he hasn't been able to stay healthy. So let's hope he gets a chance to finish the season strong. And we want you to finish the season strong. So I think you should be cutting a couple guys here. And the first guy to quit on, Kyle Pitts. And it hurts me to say this, but things are not going well for Pitts. He's got 1 or 0 catches in 3 of his last 4 games. The schedule also not that easy between now and week 17, other than he does have 1 decent game against the Raiders, but I'm not sure I trust Pitts to take advantage of that given his recent lack of production. And the Falcons, they've dialed back his usage as well. I mean, he only played 40% of the snaps last week, and that's just not what we're looking for, so you can drop Pitts. You could also drop CJ Stroud, who's on bye this week, and Stroud really struggling this year, only top 20 fantasy points in 1 game. That was all the way back in week 4. He gets the Dolphins and the Chiefs when he returns from the bye. Those are not favorable matchups, so Stroud is a drop. And that is all for Start, Sit, Stash, Quit this week. But if you want more, head over to theScore, check out all my content there. You should also be downloading and listening to the Score Fantasy Football podcast. That's available on theScore or on whatever podcast platform you use. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button below to make sure you're getting all our football videos on the No Timeouts YouTube channel every week.